To me, nature is such an important part of my experience and my mental health and my understanding of my place in the world, and climate change and everything is really tied to my appreciation for nature. And that's something that I'm trying to get into her.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. Hi, everybody. I'd like to thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Dadography podcast, where we have conversations with dads from around the globe in order to gain knowledge, insights, tips to help us along our journey of fatherhood. I'm your host, Corey Ward. If this is your first time tuning in, please be sure to subscribe. It doesn't matter if it's on YouTube or a podcast platform like Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're there. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, James Walker. And with that thought in mind, James, welcome to the Dadography podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Corey. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. It's been a while, man, since we've really been able to sit down and chop it up. But if you would, man, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, man.
All right, fantastic, man. So my name is James Walker. I am from Trinidad and Tobago. So for those who don't know, that's a country in the Caribbean, Twin Islands. That's why it has two names, and it's right off the coast of Venezuela, about 7 miles at its nearest point. But English speaking, ex-British colony, hence the English speaking. And I'm a dad I have one kid. Her name is Zara. She's 6, and I'm married to her mom. Her name is Dassel. And we've been back in Trinidad now for about 2 years. So prior to that, we were in Panama for a short while, and then in London for about a decade, where my wife and I pursued our careers up there for a bit. But we're back in Trinidad now, where both she and I are from originally. So it's really nice to be back home.
Yeah, I imagine so. I imagine it's a huge difference climate-wise, too, between, just looking at the contrast between London and then, of course, Trinidad, right? So,
For sure. I mean, I'm not even sure why. It's hard for us to understand sometimes how we manage to survive that long because when you get to be home and you wake up every day and you can just go outside, without putting a coat on and getting an umbrella, it feels it feels really good. But yeah,
huge
it's
difference.
different. Very big difference. Very big difference.
So you've got one daughter, Zara, 6 years old. So you've been on your fatherhood journey for about 6 years. But I like to think in terms of, I guess all of us to some degree or another began at least observing fatherhood from whatever experience we had with our fathers or lack thereof. What about you, man? What was your dad like? What was it like growing up with your dad and seeing fatherhood with him?
Yeah, no, I think I mean, I was definitely blessed with a great dad. My dad is still alive, thankfully as well, and my mom and him are still together, which is great. First child of four. Three of us were
Okay.
around the same age, and then there was one who came much later. He's around 20 or so now. Um,
Okay.
I would say I got a lot from my dad. I was able to see certain behaviors that I've modeled, and then maybe others that I haven't. And I'd say that's normal. There are things that you like and things that you less like. I think
Right.
my dad is certainly very hardworking. I saw that very, very clearly up front. And that was because even in the first few years, where we grew up, it was in a small apartment, and he worked at home. Long before COVID, he was working at home. He had a home office, but the three kids lived in the home office. Basically, he's an architect, and even when we moved to a bigger place, and he had his own office separate from our rooms, then he would be up at three in the morning, kind of thing, and start early before the kids could interrupt him. So we definitely saw the hardworking guy. We saw the guy who was very committed to service, always helping people, or later in life the church and these kind of things, and very
Right.
generous as well. And those are probably the three
Mhm.
aspects that I identify. Interestingly, kind of in the run up to today's conversation, I kind of surveyed my siblings, and they would use very different words, and they think of him in different ways. But I guess that just
Mm.
reflects the fact that we're still talking about the same guy, and we kind of grew up in the same household, but yet our individual experiences of someone can be different. We would think of different things top of mind.
In your case, it was generosity, work, commitment. What's one of the things like one of your siblings said that kind of you're like, wow, that's different.
I talked about the generosity stuff and my sister yesterday. She was kind of, oh, okay. And I wouldn't have really said that. I mean, yeah, yes, he's generous, but I wouldn't have been my top three kind of thing. That she would have seen it more like, she didn't feel that she got to spend a lot of time because he would come and give a kiss at the breakfast table in the morning, and then she goes to school, and then comes back. She does her activities. He's working, and then they see each other briefly in the evening. So maybe she felt that she didn't spend a lot of time physically, but and I think to myself, that's kind of strange because he spent so much time with us. But again, she's a bit younger, so she spent less time in that very tight apartment where I spent more time. And she spent a bit
Mm.
more time where we had space and we weren't sleeping in his office. But again, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, same family, but yet it could be a different experience.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. It makes one extremely mindful of the fact that, fatherhood can have some long term effects on a child and, positive or negative. But the fact that you and your siblings, same household, same mom, same dad, yet, again, perspective and experience and coming to different, not necessarily different conclusions, but just different areas that were considered significant, for you. Yeah, it definitely makes you think about the long term value of fatherhood. In your own words, what would be your fatherhood style?
Yeah, so I would imagine that it's a bit, let's say, open to allow for learning, I guess is the first thing that always comes to mind. And
Hmm.
I try my best to be, although you need to be prescriptive with a 6 year old, step away from the
Hmm.
oven, these kind of things. But
Right.
I try to allow her to think and be creative and come up with a solution and come up with it quickly on her feet. And maybe it's me being a little bit too overly pragmatic, but I just get the sense that going forward in this world, we're going to need people to be quick thinkers and be creative, and so I feel a bit responsible for helping her get there, because the school, I assume school is going to give her the structure and all the the basic knowledge that she's going to need, and she's going to learn the whatever the times tables, and she's going to learn how to speak and write well. But will she be able to respond nimbly and with resilience, and in a creative way?
That's good stuff, James.
Yeah,
What does that look like practically? Like, kind of helping,
yeah,
create this nimble
right,
mental
yeah.
ability.
So this week, for example, the school asks them, and they're online school now because of the pandemic still.
Okay.
And the school on Thursday night sends out some instructions for Friday, and invariably Friday is like a dress up day because otherwise they have to wear their uniform even at home.
Okay.
And the teacher asked you dress up like your favorite breakfast, and to send on a Thursday night. How are we gonna prepare this? But I'm like, you know what, Zara, come on, let's go to the cupboard. Let's start talking about your favorite. What do you eat? And what does it look like? Okay, show me the Cheerios kind of thing. Okay, what could this look like? And I knew the day before she actually broke a necklace to get the beads off. So actually I knew there was a broken necklace hanging around. And we got
Hmm.
to the point where she was like, oh yeah, okay, this could be a necklace. Let's make this Cheerios into a necklace. And then I'll put on a yellow t-shirt and be scrambled eggs and Cheerios. So
Okay.
it's about how do you kind of put things in front of face and start asking questions so that she could get to the
Right.
point where she could kind of put two and two together and think about it for herself.
Well, I got to tell you, man, I've interviewed and conversed with a lot of dads, but that's a very unique insight, especially when, and obviously it's applicable for a 6 year old, but I'm inclined to believe that that probably goes right on up until till late teenage years, encouraging and fostering an environment of quick thought and application. Like you said, the school's gonna handle the structure part and the basics, right? The reading, the writing, etc. But that's really good. That's without question going into my Rolodex or toolbox of things to do as a dad. So you mentioned that you guys are from Trinidad, and earlier you said you guys are back home. So, one of the things that I've found in conversing with different dads is that there just tend to be cultural nuances. And a lot of times For the individual, it may even be a blind spot, right? Like they may not even be aware that they view this way because they're from this place. I
Hmm.
remember in one of the earlier episodes, a guy from Burkina Faso was sharing how, he had some challenges being a dad. And it kind of went into the whole it takes a village to raise a child thing. But it really hinged on that based on his experience there. I remember talking with, one of the dads in India, and he made a comment that just kind of floored me as well as Vic. And he was like, for us, a parent is kind of like a god. And I was like, wow. So again, one of those cultural nuances that really stands out. What are some of the pros and cons of being a father on an island?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. And I think the islands and the islands, you can get quite small and then you can get bigger. So I guess maybe I can speak for the Trinidad experience. This is a country of around 1.3 million people, so not very big, but still has decent sort of cultural and other elements compared to, let's say, an island of 100,000 people or 60,000 people or 20,000 people in some other part of the Caribbean. So
Right.
um, I think people romanticize a little bit what it might be like growing up on an island. And maybe it's because I'm so familiar with it that maybe I've lost some of that romance. But I would say that the experience of childhood or even parenthood in 2021 in a place like Trinidad maybe is a bit closer to that metropole experience that we would have had if we stayed in the States or if we stayed in the UK. It's maybe not as different as you could imagine. And that's just predicated by the types of experiences that we're having, and especially now in this kind of pandemic setting as well. You know, if we were in the UK, it should probably still be under semi lockdown and watching the same shows on Netflix. So it kind of it feels like I really wish or want to be able to have this sort of island upbringing
Right.
in the romanticized way, climbing coconut trees and pelting mango trees and that still is possible, right? And she still enjoys that and she still goes to the backyard and she picks the mangoes even though they're not properly ripe. And I keep saying, leave the mangoes. So you do have those outdoors experiences, and that's really what I'm trying to instill in her because, really the benefit of living in on an island, and certainly in the tropics, is nature and it's animals and wildlife and plants and being outside any day of the year and
Right.
going to the beach and going on hikes. And to me, nature is such an important part of my experience and my mental health and my understanding of my place in the world, and climate change and everything is really tied to my appreciation for nature. And that's something that I'm trying to get into her. And I guess, I say all this and say, okay, the experiences may not be super different from the metro, but it is. Last week,
Right.
as an example, I came home, brought the dog back from the vet, put him in the
Hmm.
yard, and then I realized he's kind of staying on one side of the yard that he doesn't really stay on. So I kind of walk and look at what he's doing. And he's there, like next to this pretty big snake, like a 6 foot snake. And
Right.
so I call the dog away, and I just call Zara quickly to the window to go and look, come and look and see the snake. Right, there's this
Hmm.
snake. It was like it was a boa, a rainbow boa, so it had a kind of a purplish sheen on it when the sun hits it. And of
Right.
course, I'm not handling this damn snake. My wife calls the zoo, and we live close to the zoo, and some couple guys from the zoo came and took the snake away because it was a little bit injured as well. So they were gonna help it and then send it off into the forest. And so, I mean,
What's
this
up,
to
man?
me,
Didn't you think you could have handled the snake, James? You could have did a little.
I mean, sexy
Yeah.
snake, I am not so keen on that.
I hear you, man.
I would have left it right there because you know what, these snakes are really good for like pest control and stuff, but
Right.
but,
But for the sake of the dog and Zara,
for the
right?
yeah. For the sake of the dog, I wasn't sure if it was gonna kill the dog. But no, I mean, bottom line is, these kind of experiences with nature. I think that's to me that's the real benefit of being on an island, and the
Mm.
weather allowing you to do that day in day out every day. You can do see stuff like that and do stuff like that every day.
Yeah, it goes back to that nimble learning or being able to be nimble and quick witted. One of the things that I love to do with my kids when the opportunity presents itself is go camping. And I told a friend of mine, I was like, look, the thing about camping is that you don't have to plan some sort of an event for them to be able to have to fix it, right? Like if you go camping, guaranteed
Something's gonna happen.
something's going to happen. And I mean, whether it's missing a tent peg or,
Yeah,
needed, having the tent set up in the wrong spot or getting there and it's raining and you got to, just any plethora of things, it's going to happen.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind
but
of little built-in adversities, that you're gonna have to face. So it's a fantastic example of something that's a little training crucible right there, camping for sure.
So what does a typical weekend look like for you and Zara now? I mean, obviously we're in the pandemic. Maybe I have this romanticized view because I know that you guys are on an island. So kind of help me out. What does it look
Yeah,
like now?
yeah. Well, I mean, discounting the pandemic a little bit, typically a weekend, Saturday mornings would tend to be market. You would go down to the market. There's one sort of in a big park near our house, and you would go and you would get your fresh fruits and vegetables for the week, and she would invariably ask for a ice lolly or some other treat, doubles, which is like a Trinidadian breakfast food. We'd come
Okay.
home, she would go to swimming, and I might have some projects that I'm working on that might be around lunchtime. And then sort of in the afternoon, it's a time to play. Maybe it's a time to go and do an activity with her cousins or with her grandparents or something. And then Sunday is a day where Trinidadians like to go to the beach. They go to the beach. They have like bacon shack or one of these kind of delicacies that they serve on the beach. You go with your family with your cooler, and
Did you
it's a
say
bit of a,
shark?
yeah, yeah. You can get alternatives to shark now, but yeah, it's sort of like a fried um, dough kind of thing with
Hmm.
sort of fried shark inside with all of these condiments, tamarind and garlic sauce and mango chutney and tons of things. It tastes fantastic. But
Right.
this is kind of like a very Sunday style Trini life, beach or
Right.
family where you have a big family lunch and you bring your grandparents or you bring a cousin or something else. Someone comes together, they bring things together and they have a Sunday lunch together. And we would tend to
Yeah.
do like a church, like a Sunday afternoon type of church. That would
Okay.
be the typical, not right now because we're in a kind of a peak in the pandemic now, but that might have been a typical weekend.
Yeah. You would think that living on an island would really help a child grow up with a good sense of community. Is that the case? I mean, would you agree with that? Would you disagree?
Yes, I would say that, which is not to discount that you can't get community in these places. I suspect that if we lived in London still, we would still have a friend community, and we had a good group of people our age who,
Okay.
and some of them who had kids, and it was really good there. But I guess the difference I would say in a place like Trinidad is that everybody is community and not just people who you know. An example I always remember, and this was at the time I was studying in the US and I came back home for Christmas and I was
Hmm.
trying to put some credit on my cell phone and I was in a pharmacy. I wasn't too sure what the process was in buying the credits and stuff like that. And there were about
Okay.
4 or 5 people behind me waiting to cash. And they realized that I was struggling a little bit, and all of them came and started discussing what's the best way to top this up. And oh, you should get this, you should do this. Nah, don't buy the $20, buy the $30 because you get this bonus. Come, let me show you how to put this in. So you have more of an interaction with strangers,
Hmm.
and so the strangers become part of that community. Now, unfortunately, it's with the violence and crime situation in the country, I think that is changing. We're losing a bit of that now, but
Okay.
there is a much broader aspect of community, I think, in a place like Trinidad compared to, let's say, a London where we were living,
Right. Right.
and that requires you to have a bit of an understanding of an elder. What is the role of an elder? What is the role of a stranger? And
Mm.
what do you need to listen to or not listen to as a kid? I mean, it must be a bit of a struggle, but knowing that and your parents guiding you in that regard, I suppose, is part of the process of growing up in a place like Trinidad.
We spoke before and you said something in passing, and you mentioned on occasion Zara can be bad mind, right? So obviously, James, we have guests that are literally listening from all over the world. So anytime a person kind of uses one of their cultural nuances or this cultural phrase that might be familiar in their geographic location, I always try to double back and have people explain what they mean. Of course, that was a private conversation, but still, since I'm bringing it up, you said to me before that she can be bad mind at times. And what is that? And help me to
Yeah,
help the audience come along and understand.
I guess I'm using it somewhat figuratively a little bit. Bad mind, I mean, it would have maybe slightly different variations in different parts of the Caribbean. Bad mind in Jamaica might mean, someone who's a very negative person and wishes bad on somebody. And that's not really what I was referring to here, but rather bad mind where I'm doing something and I'm applying bad mind, which just kind of means setting your mind to it and no one or nothing is distracting you. You're gonna do it till the end, till the death. I'm gonna prove it to you. You can't tell me stop, you can't tell me no. It's
Right.
this is it. My mind is
Hmm.
set
Hmm.
and there's no turning back. I'm gonna do it till I prove it.
It sounds like that could be equated to being just a strong-willed child. How about that one?
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say she is quite a strong-willed child. I wouldn't say she always knows what she wants, but when she does determine to do something, she will beat herself up. If she can't do it, then she will go and try 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 and come back tomorrow and try
Right.
and try. Which is, I suppose, is also a good quality. But it also means that it takes a while to convince her that actually, you know what, you really don't need to do that, or you really ought not to do that, or come and do
Hmm.
this. This is more important than that, and that's where the kind of coaxing and persuasion comes in.
Right. It would seem that the challenge with a strong-willed child can be if a parent is a helicopter parent, right? Like they're always over the child. Don't step there, you might fall. And I'm not
Mhm.
talking about like in some some precipice of 30 feet or something like that, but just cuts and scrapes type deal. How do you find a balance between her being strong-willed and then maintaining not being a helicopter parent where you're always just hovering over her?
Yeah. I probably wouldn't describe myself as a helicopter parent, but I guess from her perspective, what she sees, and I asked her this actually in kind of the run up to this conversation. I
Hmm.
kind of asked her to describe me, and she would use words like "you're very bossy," and "you're impatient." So I know that me trying to counteract some of this super strong will ends up being Zara, not now. We are not making this cake at 7 a.m. because, like, whatever. And so to her, that comes off as bossy, right? Shouty sometimes. Unfortunately, might lose my temper every once in a while. But I think at the end of the day, as well, I mean, you're the parent, right? So I think I still, and maybe this is coming back to that island or Trinidad or that Caribbean cultural way. You're the parent. You also need to set those very clear boundaries. Put your foot down, and you can't have your
Yeah.
child walking all over. You could be as strong will as you want, but
Hmm.
if your will is to eat ice cream at 6 in the morning, well then screw your will. Your will can't be the way. Yeah.
Hey, fellas, just so you're aware, you can stay up to breast and up to speed on every episode by following us on YouTube. In the search bar, just type the Dadography Podcast. When it comes up, select the subscribe button. You'll be sure to be up to date on all of the tools and tips that we get from fathers around the globe. But I'm going to tell you, it's funny you mentioned that exact same thing, right? So I had a recent conversation with a dad. He's originally from Chile. Well, we got into a portion of our conversation where we were talking about principles versus personal preference, and he used not ice cream, but he said his son wanted to eat some cereal for dinner. And he was like, "No, you're not going to eat cereal for dinner. I'm not going to let that happen." And then, anyway, in the midst of him thinking about it, he's like, is that a principle that I think should be applied, across the board all the time, or is that just my personal preference? I don't think you should eat cereal. So I think it's important to know for dads that are listening. Sometimes you're gonna select a personal preference and try to apply this as a principle, and not always the case. But I think you're 100% right. I'm not pro ice cream at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic principle and thought actually, and it happened to me recently too within the last week or two. And she asked, I knew that we had a sandwich for lunch. Again, like all the restaurants are closed, we're doing our best at home cooking. She had a
Hmm.
sandwich for lunch, and then she wanted to have a cheese sandwich for dinner. and I said, Zara, you
Mm.
had a sandwich for lunch. Let's try to have something else that's a little bit more nutritious or something like that. And I was being a little bit lazy and wasn't thinking too hard either. And I was like, what about, can I make you some pasta and cheese? And I was like, but pasta and cheese is wheat and cheese. What is the difference? you know? So I was like, you know what? Have your sandwich and cheese, right? Have your bread and cheese. Go ahead and do it because you're thinking like, oh, well, you don't want to have the sandwich twice, but what's the principle? It's not preference and principle. Fantastic way of articulating it. So I'll
Yeah,
take that out of this call.
yeah, definitely, man. How do you think that her strong will end up being a benefit to her in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that she can apply this strong-willed mindset in certain circumstances that would allow her to have the small wins and the small victories in life that I think really allow you to step up and take on bigger and bigger challenges.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I used to run this organization called Marty Expeditions, which was to get teenagers from different Caribbean islands together for 2-week residential programs, working with charities and whatnot. And it was a way to kind of build their leadership. And
Okay.
we talked a little bit about adversity before, and it goes back to that. It's you need to have little situations in life where you face the adversity, you problem solve the solution, you acted on it, and then sometimes it goes bad, but there are gonna need to be times when it goes well and it works out. And then you realize, I did that, or I was able to overcome that. And then when the next challenge comes around, or bigger challenge comes around, you can remember that thing that you that you conquered back
Yeah.
then. And I think building on these kind of micro wins, these kind of micro victories, I think is what I think the application of the strong will kind of comes to, and then allows you to kind of. I remember back in the day. I mean, you may have played this game. These kind of like NBA games from back in the Nintendo days and early computer days, where you
Double
might
dribble, was it?
yeah, you might have had, let's say you were shooting and you shot three baskets in a row and you go, he's on fire, and the ball goes on fire. And
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of
that
a
was the game,
sudden,
Nintendo.
yeah, all of a sudden now that person is on a streak and that person is able to do better and that player is doing better and better in the game. And I
Hmm.
kind of feel the same way with kids as well. It's like I need you to see a couple things, see yourself doing it, trying hard, making it work, so that you could see yourself on a streak. I guess it goes back to some deep down psychological principles, but that's kind of why I wanted to apply that strong will. You know,
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. I know you're not a professional in the sense of a professional dad, right? But I always tell guys, listen, if you were in, a particular industry at work, right, and you've been doing it for 6 years, you're at that point, you're a professional, right? So here's a question for you, and I propose it so that it can be a form of encouragement for dads. Based on your observation, what encouragement would you give to dads that they might foster their kids in independence without allowing it to get to the point of disrespect or disobedience, but they still want to foster their kids independence? What are some practical things you might encourage somebody to do, James?
yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's I'm no doubt going to be age appropriate, and I think at different ages you could expect different levels of
Right.
independence. I mean, the first thing would be to consider the fact that eventually, and it doesn't take too long, but eventually your kid is going to be old enough to have to make the decisions on their own and have to do it on their own. And that could come quite early in some cases, right? And the more that they have the chance to make the decisions while you're still around, so that you could provide some of that coaching retroactively, not necessarily preempting their decision, but you're still around, they're still living in your house, and you still have a chance to speak with them or observe things that go wrong when they make the bad decisions. That is the time. I think it's going to
Right.
be a little bit harder to wait until she's 24 and she's out of the house, maybe even in another country. And I'm not
Hmm.
seeing what's going on or being as active in what's going on to provide that counsel. Whereas now, it's like, okay, let me give you a little bit more space so you could learn to do that or do that differently. And so to give that space while you're still there, while I mean, if especially I guess I'm speaking to people to guys who have the kind of younger kids,
Right.
because ultimately, yeah, eventually they will have to make the decision for themselves. So really, it's how do you create that space for them now?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, that would kind of be the first thing that would come to mind, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's really solid, though. I think everybody agrees that experience is the best teacher. So let them get some experience, right?
That's
So,
it.
I remember how when you're here in Panama, you traveled a lot. And, as an international business consultant, this country, that, and I mean, maybe several different countries in a span of 2 weeks, right? So, what is the contrast now? Obviously, you're back home. You've gone home and settled. You're working with a different company now, and you've seen your daughter on a daily basis. What's the contrast with that now as it relates to fathering?
Yeah, exactly. Massive contrast. So I joined a strategy consultancy in London on Zara's first birthday
Okay.
and got into that traveling routine quite quickly. And because I was working in energy and oil and gas, it meant that, well, you don't drill for oil in London. So I was in Angola and I was in Malaysia and Korea, and these different places.
Right.
And it meant that I was very often at home just on weekends. And then
Mm,
the odd occasion I might have a project locally or something, or in Western Europe, then I can come back, a little bit earlier on. But I spent a lot of time away for those first few
hmm.
years, which meant really that I had to rely a lot more heavily on my wife to do the core childcare. And she was working full time too for a lot of the time, at least in the start in London. So, she kind of bore that brunt,
Right.
which meant that my interaction, and think about, I mean, if I'm in Korea and I have a 1.5 year old, she's not going to engage me on Zoom or FaceTime very long. It's not the
Right.
age to do that. So
Right. Right.
you felt a little bit, like maybe you were missing out. The guilt was there too at times. You felt a little bit guilty, like, something big is
Mm,
happening at home, or where something bad happened at home and I couldn't be there to help, or I had
mm,
to rush to get home. But rushing means getting home in 8 hours or 12 hours. So that was a real struggle. Whereas now, having left that job now and not traveling, and then the pandemic means really not traveling, I don't even miss it yet. you know, I'm still super 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 happy to not be on a plane, not living out of a suitcase, and then just being there. Now it's even more intense. She's school at home. It means I'm seeing her throughout the day, and I'm
mhm.
going out for a break or something, like have a drink, or she's coming in to interrupt me while I'm in a call to ask for something. It's a real special feeling, and it's gives me plenty more exposure and time with her than I didn't have before. So actually, this to me is a bit of a bright spark in this whole
Yeah.
experience, and so I'm very grateful that I could spend more time now, a fun time as well.
Yeah, the time with the daughter is just special. I often tell people about there's not too much I think I can equate to come home from work kiss, right?
Yeah,
It's like, and it's the singular reason that you get this kiss is because you're my dad. And that's it.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I can see that being a huge benefit alongside getting to know her more and just being able to be a part of the ongoing teaching and upbringing. So a huge plus for sure. Now, we don't have a clue when things will be open up the way that they were or if they'll be that way again, but at some point we'll be able to travel a little bit more frequently. Do you think, and I'm thinking because now your daughter's lived in 3 countries already, but of course she's fairly young, so probably not have really taken in as much as if she would have if she were older. But do you think that travel is going to be an integral part of her upbringing and perhaps some sort of a benefit to her overall in the long term?
yeah. I think so. I definitely think so. I mean, even though she did the UK and Panama at a very young age,
Hmm.
I still see the benefit from that time. She still remembers quite a bit of stuff in Spanish, and she still connects with her friends. And she had a call today with her little best friend from London, and I mean, she left there when now she's 3, and but
Oh
they've
wow.
still managed to keep in touch despite the distance, despite their age. So
Hmm.
I think there's a lot to be said for travel. And my parents probably did it for me as well. The default assumption is that, James, after your high school, we want you to go far away and learn something else outside of this space, outside of Trinidad, outside of this home. And I
Right.
think I probably no, obviously I'm not telling a 6-year-old this is yet, but subliminally I'm probably communicating all the time that you're gonna get a chance to go. if you want to go back
Mhm.
to the UK, you can. But if you want to go anywhere, you can do that and go and you're gonna go and study university in some far off place, and please send us flight tickets. And anytime she gets annoyed with me or my wife, she would say, "I'm not gonna buy you a plane ticket to come and see me in when I'm living, you know, when I'm living in whatever." She chooses a place. When I'm in Canada, I'm not gonna send you a plane ticket. So I think she already knows that there's the world is big, and you gotta really experience it. You can't
Yeah.
really just stay here in this island and expect that you're gonna be able to
Mhm.
have the fullness of what the world could offer you and what she's privileged to access, right?
Yeah. So I mentioned how cultural nuances sometimes can be blind spots, right? And so there's one right there, James, because I remember speaking to a father from Curacao, and he summarized it by saying, on an island, we tend to raise our children to at some point leave their homeland,
Mm,
right? And I was like, and like where I'm from Florida, so like maybe you raise your child to leave the city, because you want them to go to college in the state, right? So you can get that cheaper college university fees.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, we live in Jacksonville. You can go to college in
yeah.
Miami, but even now she's 6, and again, that's that cultural nuance. That's something that I think personally is somewhat unique, not totally, but somewhat unique to islands in that you kind of raise your children with the idea that one day you're going to leave the island and you're going to be somewhere else in the world, whereas a lot of places don't really have that thought. So that's definitely one of those cultural nuances there,
Feels a bit like a Disney story or something, Moana. So you gotta leave this island, you know.
man.
But I mean, I guess
Right.
yeah, maybe it's the colonial legacy, because
Mhm.
back then it was you had to go to London to become a gentleman, or you had to go there to be educated because there was no university on the island. Obviously, that's not the case now. She could very
Right.
well stay here, and we have a lot of friends and several family members who would have never left, did never studied here and worked here right away, and didn't do that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And the internet and everything else we have now really means that there's a lot you could still learn and see and do actually here, or you just travel and just do it, short term. But at the end of
Right.
the day, I've had such a rich experience personally, and both me and
Mhm.
my wife worked, studied in. I did study abroad things in Brazil and Costa Rica, and she was in France. We've learned a lot being in a different country, especially different languages. That I wouldn't hold that back from her. So I definitely encourage that.
Right. When my kids were fairly young, maybe 4, 5, I told them, I said, you're going to be responsible for learning 3 languages before leaving my house. And that was actually inspired by Arthur Ashe. He was a
Mm-hmm.
African American tennis player back in the day, and he got AIDS from a blood transfusion. And the last chapter in this book that he wrote, Days of Grace, was essentially just a letter to his daughter and or his daughters, excuse me. And that was one of the things that I think he was like from Cleveland, Ohio. He didn't start traveling until he became really good in tennis, and so now he's in France, he's in Australia, he's in Germany, all these different places, and he was just amazed at how the lack of a foreign language
Mm-hmm.
disabled him in terms of just social mobility. And so he really in that book encouraged. So I adopted that thought as my own. I was like, I want to make sure my kids speak at least 3,
Mm-hmm.
So
That's good.
and yeah, they're doing okay. They're hanging in there anyway. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on to the Dadography podcast. It's a pleasure to be able to sit down and converse with you. I look forward to making my way over to Trinidad as soon as things are
Yeah,
open up. We are long overdue for some sort of adventure, be it a
for
hike,
sure.
some paddle boarding, some
Big
diving,
snakes.
snorkeling. Yeah, snakes, anything, man. So, but but thanks again, man, for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it, man. And I
Yeah,
think
thanks for having me.
the insights that you've given will prove to be of benefits to dads out there. To all you dads out there, guys, keep in mind that fatherhood is an ongoing learning continuum. And so an opportunity to be able to hear from dads around the globe, to be able to just hear their experience and pick up little tools and tips from their experience is a huge plus. So continue to tune into Dadography Podcast. Thank you once again, and we'll look forward to speaking to you guys next week.
Once again, hear about teaching your kids beyond the basics provided by most schools. In James's case, it's about teaching his daughter to be a quick thinker and a fast responder. Consider new learning techniques for your child and help take them to the next level.
If you have access to nature as a background for raising your kids, use it. And make sure your child understands how important this is. Help to foster independence and decision making while your child is still at home. This is the time for them to make mistakes and for you to be available to help guide them through. It's a lot harder once they leave the nest.
Remember to celebrate the small wins. They set a foundation and give confidence for bigger challenges.
Thanks for your time, James. Anytime is Trinidad time. See you guys next week with another good conversation and more insights.